June 7, 1944. Dawn breaks over the Normandy countryside, 12 miles inland from Omaha Beach. The landscape looks peaceful, pastoral even. Ancient hedgerows crisscross the terrain like veins on weathered hands, dividing the earth into countless small fields. Local farmers have called this the bocage for centuries. Dense thickets of hawthorn, bramble, and oak, growing from earthen mounds that stand 4, sometimes 5 feet high. Roots tangled together over generations, impenetrable walls of vegetation. But there is nothing peaceful about this morning. The American 3rd Armored Division has ground to a halt. Their M4 Sherman tanks, machines that crossed an ocean to liberate Europe, now sit vulnerable and exposed. Every attempt to push forward has ended the same way. The Shermans approach a hedgerow. Engines roar as they climb the earthen embankment. The tank tilts upward, tracks clawing for purchase. And then, catastrophically, the belly armor becomes exposed. 5 seconds, 10 seconds. The thinnest part of the tank, barely an inch of steel, pointed directly at German anti-tank guns hidden in the next field over. The metallic crack of an 88mm round echoes across the bocage. Another Sherman burns. Tank crews begin calling the hedgerows green walls of death. They are not wrong. The statistics are brutal. Of every 5 tanks that attempt to breach the bocage, 1 does not return. The crews that survive describe watching their friends die in fire, trapped inside steel coffins that were supposed to protect them. The Allied advance, which stormed the beaches just days earlier with such momentum, has slowed to a crawl. Sometimes worse than a crawl, sometimes complete paralysis. General Omar Bradley paces his command tent, studying maps that no longer make sense. The invasion planners had aerial photographs of Normandy. They saw the hedgerows from above, neat geometric patterns dividing farmland. What they failed to understand was the depth, the density, the ancient stubborn nature of vegetation that has grown undisturbed since medieval times. Every field is a fortress. Every hedgerow, a ready-made defensive position for German infantry who know this terrain intimately. The German 7th Army has turned the bocage into a killing field. Their soldiers hide in hedgerow corners with Panzerfaust anti-tank weapons. They allow American infantry to pass, then destroy the supporting armor from behind. Machine gun nests are everywhere and nowhere. The Americans cannot see 30 yards in any direction. Artillery observers cannot direct fire effectively. The close terrain negates every technological advantage the Allies possess. Superior air power means nothing when the enemy is invisible beneath a canopy of leaves. By June 10th, the situation has become critical. The breakout from the beachhead depends on armor. Infantry alone cannot generate the speed and shock necessary to prevent German reinforcements from arriving. But the tanks cannot move. Bradley's staff begins exploring alternatives. Engineers suggest demolishing hedgerows with explosives. The first attempts are made. Bangalore torpedoes, the same devices used to clear beach obstacles, are placed at the base of hedgerows. The explosions are impressive. They tear gaps in the vegetation. But they also announce American positions to every German within a mile. And they are slow, agonizingly slow. Each hedgerow requires 30 minutes to prepare and demolish. Normandy contains tens of thousands of hedgerows. The mathematics are impossible. Someone suggests flamethrower tanks. The British have developed Churchill crocodiles that can project burning fuel over 100 yards. But fire does not destroy earth and roots quickly enough. The hedgerows char and smoke, but they do not fall. And again the flames advertise American movements like beacons. Bradley holds a meeting of senior officers on June 12th. The mood is grim. Casualties are mounting. Progress is measured in yards per day. One colonel suggests abandoning armor altogether in the bocage, reverting to pure infantry tactics. Another proposes waiting for massive artillery preparation before each advance. Bradley knows neither option will work. The invasion is on a timetable. Further inland, the city of St. Lo must fall. The crucial road network around Caen must be captured. Delay means failure. Failure means the Germans consolidate their defenses. And thousands more Americans die in the green walls of death. Curtis G. Culin Jr. is not thinking about grand strategy. He is 29 years old, a sergeant in the 102nd Cavalry Reconnaissance Squadron, and he is angry. Angry at watching friends die. Angry at the helplessness of sitting in a tank that has become a death trap. angry at hedgerows that seem designed by some malevolent god to murder tankers. Culin grew up in Cranford, New Jersey. Before the war he worked as a cab driver, not an engineer, not a scientist, just a working man who understood machines the way mechanics understand them, through experience, through necessity, through the practical knowledge that comes from fixing things that break. On June 13th, Culin sits beside his tank smoking a cigarette, staring at a hedgerow. Other soldiers have learned to avoid these moments. Culin has a reputation for obsessive problem-solving. He talks to himself, sketches ideas in the dirt with sticks, disappears into his own thoughts for hours. Today he is thinking about teeth. The tank's tracks can grip earth effectively. The engine has enough power to drive through most obstacles. But the hedgerow's earthen base is too steep. The tank tilts too far. Always the same problem. The belly armor exposed, the fatal angle. What if the tank did not climb over the hedgerow? What if it cut through? Culin stands and walks toward a field where combat engineers have been clearing German obstacles. Scattered across the grass are dozens of steel beams, hedgehogs. The Germans welded them from railroad rails and placed them on beaches to rip open landing craft. Now they lie abandoned, waiting to be collected as scrap metal. Culin looks at the steel. He looks at his tank. He begins to calculate. The next morning, without permission, without orders, Culin approaches the squadron's maintenance sergeant. He needs a welding torch. He needs help. The maintenance sergeant, whose name history has not preserved, asks what Culin is doing. Culin explains. The sergeant nods slowly. Then he says, "That's crazy enough to work." They cut 6 pieces of steel from a German hedgehog. Each piece is roughly 18 inches long, angle iron that tapers to a brutal point. Culin arranges them in 2 rows across the front of his Sherman. 2 prongs on the left, 2 in the center, 2 on the right, angled forward and downward like the tusks of some prehistoric beast. The welding is crude but solid. It takes 4 hours. When they finish, Cullin's Sherman looks strange, aggressive, purpose-built for violence against vegetation. He drives to an empty field where a typical Normandy hedgerow stands undisturbed. His crew watches from a distance. Culin accelerates, 20 miles per hour. The steel prongs hit the hedgerow base. There is a grinding, tearing sound. The tank does not tilt upward. Instead, the prongs cut into the earthen mound, slicing through roots and soil. The Sherman keeps moving, staying level, maintaining its armor angle. And then, suddenly, impossibly, the tank is through, on the other side of the hedgerow. The entire process took 12 seconds. One of Cullin's crew, a gunner named Phillips, later describes the moment. "We couldn't believe it. The Sarge just drove straight through like the hedge wasn't even there. No climbing, no exposing the belly, just through." Word spreads through the 3rd Armored Division like wildfire. By evening on June 14th, officers arrive to inspect Cullin's modified tank. They are skeptical at first. The device looks improvised. Desperate. But Bradley's staff has learned something in Normandy. Desperate solutions are the only ones that matter. They order field trials, immediate and extensive. Culin demonstrates his hedge cutter again and again. Different hedgerows, different soil conditions, different angles of approach. The device works every time, not perfectly. Sometimes the prongs catch on particularly thick roots. Sometimes the tank must reverse and attack from a slightly different position. But the fundamental problem is solved. The Sherman no longer exposes its vulnerable underside. More importantly, the hedge cutter is silent, or nearly so. The sound of a tank engine is no louder with the cutting prongs than without them. Unlike explosives or flamethrowers, Cullin's device does not announce American intentions to every German in the sector. The element of surprise, lost for nearly 2 weeks, suddenly returns. Bradley's staff faces a critical decision. The hedge cutter clearly works, but can they manufacture enough devices to matter? The answer depends on steel, welding equipment, and time. They have almost no time. The St. Lo offensive is scheduled to begin within days. Without a solution to the bocage problem, that offensive will fail. Someone suggests requisitioning steel from supply depots. The proposal is rejected immediately. Supply chains are still fragile. Ships bringing material from England are needed for ammunition, fuel, and food. There is no spare capacity for experimental tank modifications. Then a captain in the engineer corps makes the obvious suggestion. Why requisition steel when the Germans have provided it? The beaches are still littered with thousands of tons of German obstacles, hedgehogs, Czech hedgehogs, tetrahedrons, millions of pounds of high-quality steel, already cut, already shaped, waiting to be used. Within 12 hours, Bradley issues orders to every maintenance company in the First Army. Collect German beach obstacles, cut them into sections. Manufacture hedge cutters according to Sergeant Culin's design. Priority, absolute. The logistics become a spectacle of organized chaos. Trucks roll down to the beaches and haul steel back to field workshops. Welders work in shifts around the clock, their torches illuminating canvas tents through the night. Each hedge cutter requires approximately 2 hours to fabricate and install. The welding must be solid. Lives depend on these crude steel prongs. Tank crews watch the modifications with a mixture of hope and disbelief. Some christen their newly equipped Shermans with names: Hedgebuster, Rhinoceros. That last name sticks. Within days, soldiers begin calling all modified tanks Rhinos. The nickname is perfect: brutal, unstoppable, equipped with horns designed to gore through obstacles. By June 18th, more than 300 Shermans have been retrofitted. By June 20th, nearly 500. The modification spreads beyond the 3rd Armored Division. The 2nd Armored Division receives hedge cutters. The 4th Armored Division, tank destroyer battalions. Even some cavalry reconnaissance units install smaller versions on their M5 Stuart light tanks. Culin himself receives a promotion and a commendation, though the paperwork is rushed and incomplete. Nobody has time for proper military bureaucracy. The battle is waiting. June 25, 1944. 0400 hours. The largest American offensive since D-Day is about to begin. Operation Cobra, designed to shatter German defenses and break out of the Normandy beachhead, depends entirely on armor moving fast. Armor that can now, finally, penetrate the bocage. The night is dark and humid. Tank crews perform final checks on their equipment. Engines idle. Radio operators confirm frequencies. Infantry squads cluster near their assigned Shermans, smoking last cigarettes before dawn. Everyone knows this offensive is different. The Rhino tanks have changed the equation. At 0430, American artillery opens fire. Hundreds of guns, carefully pre-registered on German positions, begin a rolling barrage that walks forward across the landscape. The sound is apocalyptic, continuous thunder that shakes the earth. Under cover of this fire, the Rhinos advance. The first hedgerow appears in the pre-dawn darkness. A Rhino from the 3rd Armored Division accelerates, its steel prongs aimed at the embankment. The tank hits at 22 miles per hour. There is the now familiar tearing sound. Roots snap, earth compresses, and the Sherman drives through, maintaining its level attitude, armor properly angled, completely protected. The infantry follows immediately, pouring through the gap. On the other side, German soldiers are still reeling from artillery. The sudden appearance of American tanks materializing through solid hedgerows creates panic. The Germans had prepared defensive positions, assuming the Americans would either climb over the hedgerows or demolish them with explosives. Neither happened. The Shermans simply appeared, as if the bocage no longer existed. Across a 5-mile front, the pattern repeats. Rhino tanks breach hedgerow after hedgerow, sometimes 3, sometimes 6 in succession. The advance that had averaged 200 yards per day suddenly accelerates to 2 miles, then 4 miles. The German defensive system, built on the assumption that the bocage would slow American armor, collapses. A German after-action report captured later describes the confusion. The enemy has deployed a new tank variant capable of breaching bocage obstacles without exposing vulnerable points. Our anti-tank teams report extreme difficulty targeting these vehicles. Traditional ambush positions no longer effective. By June 26th, American forces have penetrated 7 miles into German-held territory. Sherman tanks, once trapped and vulnerable, now operate with devastating effectiveness. They appear from unexpected directions. They bypass German strong points by cutting through hedgerows into adjacent fields. The tactical flexibility that armor should provide has finally been achieved. Tank loss rates plummet. During the first week after D-Day, the 3rd Armored Division lost an average of 12 tanks per day to bocage-related casualties. After the Rhino modifications, that number drops to fewer than 3 per day. The reduction is dramatic, statistically improbable, and entirely attributable to Culin's Hedge cutter. July 7, 1944. 72 hours of sustained offensive operations culminate in the capture of St. Lo. The city, a crucial road junction, had been the objective since the invasion began. Its fall opens the door to deeper penetrations into France. German commanders realize their bocage defense is broken. They begin withdrawing forces toward prepared positions further south. The Rhino tanks do not stop. They pursue through the countryside, cutting through hedgerows that no longer offer protection to retreating Germans. Infantry rides on the tank decks, dismounting only when enemy contact is made. The fighting remains brutal, but the paralysis is over. The stagnation that nearly strangled the invasion has ended. Bradley's headquarters conducts an analysis in August, after the breakout from Normandy is complete. They attempt to quantify the impact of Culin's Hedge cutter. The numbers are striking. In the 2 weeks before Rhino tanks were widely deployed, the First Army advanced an average of 6 miles total. In the 3 days immediately after widespread deployment, the advance covered 23 miles. But statistics cannot capture the psychological impact. Tank crews who had felt helpless now felt empowered. The green walls of death became just walls, obstacles to be overcome, not feared. Morale, that intangible but crucial factor in military effectiveness, surged. Curtis Culin survived the war. He returned to New Jersey, returned to civilian life, and largely avoided publicity. In later years, when historians tracked him down, he was characteristically modest about his contribution. "I just wanted to get through the damn hedges," he said in one interview. "Couldn't stand watching good men die for no reason." The Hedge cutter itself underwent refinements. Engineer battalions developed improved versions with adjustable prongs. Some designs incorporated hydraulic mechanisms that allowed the angle to be changed mid-battle. But none of these improvements altered the fundamental principle. Culin's original concept, welded together from scrap steel in a field workshop, remained the template. The device spread beyond the American forces. British tank units adopted similar modifications. Canadian armor followed suit. Even some captured German tanks pressed into Allied service received Hedge cutters. The innovation became universal because it solved a universal problem. There is a broader lesson here, one that echoes across military history. Institutional knowledge, no matter how extensive, cannot anticipate every problem. War is improvisational by nature. The solution to the bocage came not from West Point graduates or MIT engineers, but from a cab driver from New Jersey who understood that simple tools, applied correctly, can defeat complex obstacles. Bradley himself acknowledged this in his memoirs. "The bocage nearly defeated us," he wrote. "Not German skill, not superior weapons, but terrain, and our failure to imagine how terrain would matter. A sergeant with a welding torch succeeded where our entire planning apparatus had failed." November 1944. The war has moved east. American armies are approaching the German border. The bocage is hundreds of miles behind the front lines, overgrown again, slowly returning to its pastoral silence. But the Rhino tanks remain, still cutting through obstacles, still proving their worth in different terrain. A captain in the 4th Armored Division writes a letter home. He mentions almost casually that his tank has a Culin device installed. He does not explain what it does. He does not describe the engineering. He simply notes that it works and that he feels safer because of it. This is how innovations become invisible. They succeed, and then they become expected. Soldiers who joined the fight after July 1944 never knew a time when tanks could not breach hedgerows. For them, the Rhino was not revolutionary. It was standard equipment. The crisis it solved had already faded into the category of problems that someone somewhere had figured out. But Curtis Culin knew, and the tankers who survived those first terrible weeks in the bocage knew. They understood that innovation, real innovation, emerges from desperation and anger, and the refusal to accept unnecessary death. It comes from men like Culin, who look at a problem and refuse to believe it is unsolvable. The Hedge cutter saved thousands of lives. It accelerated the liberation of France. It contributed, in ways both measurable and immeasurable, to the defeat of Nazi Germany. And it began with a sergeant, a pile of scrap steel, and the simplest possible idea: if you cannot go over an obstacle, cut through it. The war would continue for nearly another year. D-Day plus 336 would finally bring victory in Europe. But the victory began in those 72 hours, when Rhino tanks broke through the bocage, when the green walls of death became just walls, when one man's crazy idea became the solution an entire army needed. The hedgerows of Normandy still stand today. Tourists visit them, walk along their bases, photograph their ancient trees. The earth still bears scars from 1944, craters and trenches slowly erased by time. But if you know where to look in certain fields, you can still find fragments of rusted steel embedded in hedgerow roots, remnants of Culin's prongs, remains of the device that changed everything. They are small pieces of metal, crude, unremarkable, but they carry the weight of what innovation truly means. Not elegant solutions developed in laboratories, but desperate answers forged in the field by people who refuse to accept defeat. The sergeant's hedge cutter reminds us that victory often depends not on the most sophisticated weapon, but on the simplest tool, wielded by someone brave enough to try something new when everything else has failed.